Okay, welcome to our third tutorial on CSC show control. In the previous tutorial, we looked at adding files, audio files to cues, and also starting to manipulate them by linking cues together and fading audio. So continuing where we left off, we have our show here where we had some pre-show music, we were fading out, and we were starting the show. So we're going to continue this show design just by adding a few things just to get the basic ideas solidified as to what we're doing. So in a typical show scenario now, we probably need to fade out this opening piece of music when the actors come on stage. So just as a recap, we'll use Control A and we will do fade out opening. This gives us yet another blank cue. Now, this time we want to do a fade on player 2 because the opening music is playing on player 2. If you're running out of space here, you can change the cue list font. I'm just going to actually remove the memory column for the time being. All the columns are under here, under the view menu, cue list columns menu. Okay, so fade out opening, we can now select player 2 either by using the up down arrows or by clicking on the overview window. And we're going to change it to fade. It's already worked out that we were playing at -8.5. So let's just fade that out. And again, over a period of about 8 seconds usually works quite well. The time that you're entering this 8 seconds here is the time for a linear movement of this mixer fader. So it is modeled on an actual fader. So it isn't a linear fade, but it's a linear movement of a modeled mixer fader. So it generally sounds correct in most scenarios. There is currently no way of actually editing fade curves per se in CSC, but in general the built-in movement of the faders usually seems to work. So just to check this, if we do start of show music, and then we can fire our next cue when we're ready to go. So there we go. Tabs are open, everyone's on the stage, and we fade out the starting music. And now we're into the show. So now we're ready to continue the show design as the director wishes for sound effects to be added. So the first thing that we've been told to add is the famous doorbell. So we're going to look at the sound effects that we've prepared, and we see that we have a couple of doorbells here. We've got an electric doorbell and a buzzer. So we're not sure what it was the director wanted, so we've come up with a couple of different versions of doorbells. So let's just have a look. We can drag in here our doorbell sound. Let's have a listen. Okay, so we assume that's what he wants. And at first glance it seems to be, so we set a level that we're quite happy with. And then of course, when it comes to tech time, he says, no, I don't like that one. So you can of course just drag something onto the top of the other one, and it will say, are you sure you want to overwrite? And we've now changed it to a different sound. The advantage of doing that is it retains all the other settings. So we haven't looked at routing yet, but it would retain our routing and it would retain our levels. So he prefers this particular doorbell, so we're going to add that. And then once the doorbell rings, he wants a dog barking in the background. So again, let's just look at what we've got here. We have our dog barking, so we can drag that in. Now you'll see by default CSC has put it on the same player. Again, that might be fine. We're not sure. Is there much of a tail on the doorbell? Let's have a listen. Yeah, there is. Now, if we wanted the doorbell and then the dog bark, there we go, dog barking. If we ran the doorbell and then the dog bark, again, it sounds unnatural because we're cutting off the doorbell. So we're going to move the dog barking to the second player. And then when we run this, then of course it sounds a bit more natural. So that particular sound effect isn't ideal from this point because it seems to bark and then it goes quite quiet. So this is a good time to actually look into using CSC's built-in wave display. So next to the open file button, you'll also see there's a button here which says display selected wave in editor. So if we click on that, it quickly does a scan. Obviously it's quite a low level file, and we can see what the file looks like. So actually it's a fairly regular dog bark in this one. It looks a bit busier here, so if I select that and hit space. Okay, I quite like that section here. So I'm just going to select it beforehand, and I've got all manner of things. I can either click this button here, or I can press S for start. And I'm deciding that I want to end the file here, so I can press E for end. And you'll see that we've now taken a small snippet of the file there, and we're ready to play that bit on its own. It's also now telling us the file is now only 6 seconds long, so if we were to play that, it goes straight into the part that we want. Okay. So now we've got the doorbell and then the dog barking. Just another shortcut key, I'm going to use F4 here, which is going to move the cue list to my highlighted position and play from there. So F4, and then I can run spacebar as well. So again, this looks like another candidate for actually using a link. So let's go to the link and say we want here to link it maybe only a second later. So we can run that. Lovely. And we can actually start to use the mixer to pan the dog barking off to one side. Maybe turn the level down a bit. And because I'm linked, all of that is now saved. So all of that is saved back into the same queue. So there we have the doorbell and then the dog barking. And then the director says, well, no one answered the door, so we then want someone to actually knock on the door. So we have a door knock here. So we'll just drag that in. Just for safety, I'm going to move it to player 3. I can probably reuse player 1, but let's just do this anyway. And there we have someone knocking on the door because no one actually answered the door. So that might happen, I don't know, 3 seconds later. So we'll do that. And we've now got a sequence. And there we have our opening sequence that the director's happy with. The doorbell, the dog bark, and the door being knocked. So far, every piece of audio that we've been adding to the show has simply been played on our default output device. But of course, if this was a real-world scenario, we would probably want the pre-show music to come from the speakers on the proscenium at the front of the auditorium. But things like the dog bark and the doorbell, we'd probably want some on-stage speakers. So let's have a quick look at how we would be setting all of that up. The first place we need to go to is under the audio menu, which is where we have all of our options for audio. So far, we've just been using the wave player and the wave player overview, and we've been using the mixer. If we head right down to audio setup at the bottom, this is where we can add our audio buses and tune our player setups and any advanced settings that we might be using. So currently I'm using the built-in Windows sound system driver, and I'm just simply showing all the devices that are available. So what we can do here is rename and maybe call this front of house. But we know that we're also going to have some speakers on stage. So I'm going to add a second bus. All buses in CSC, for legacy reasons, they are all stereo buses. So if you want an 8 output sound system, you're more than likely to then have 4 stereo buses. It doesn't mean you have to use everything in stereo pairs. As we will see, you are able to route to individual left or right sockets or a whole combination of the two. But the way you add things in the first place is by using these stereo buses. So we've got a front of house left and right pair. Then maybe we've got an upstage pair, and I'm going to create a bus that we might have for a play. I'm going to call it a specials. By default, it names things left and right, but we can go in. So the specials here are probably not going to be a stereo pair. We might have a prop radio and maybe a prop TV or something. So we can actually name these individually, and we can say prop radio. Let's call it a bit shorter. In fact, let's just call it radio. And let's call this one TV. So now that I've added in these 3 buses, if I hit close now and go back to our door knock sound, you'll see this word here, out type. There's 3 different types of routing in CSC. We have what's called a bus, which is the buses we just looked at. They are stereo pairs. Then you have a mono, which is either the left or the right hand side of that stereo pair. anything that is played, any stereo content will be downmixed into mono before being routed to the left or the right hand side of that pair. And then we have multi, which we'll be covering in a later tutorial. So under bus, you'll see that we now have the 3 buses we've added: front of house, upstage, and the specials. Under mono, you'll see that we have front of house, left, right. But this is where it now defines it as radio or TV. So we can send specific routing to any of those places. The final option, the multi, if I was to click on multi, currently I have no group set up, but this now enables my group routing. By clicking on this, this brings up my routing groups, and you can see now I have my input channel here. This is the master level for the wave player. And then I have a small mixer where I can define how much of the sound goes to all these different parts of the sound system. So now I would be sending my door knock to front of house right, upstage left, and a mixture of radio and TV. We are also able to create groups so that we can recall that, but there'll be more on that in a later tutorial. So for now, let's reset. I'm actually going to use a straightforward door knock, so I'm going to use the upstage routing. So that would just use the onstage speakers. You'll see that all the outputs are also shown in the cue list. So we know that the pre-show, we do want front of house. If we just quickly redo that, just to refresh. See, as we changed the name, so we've now got front of house, start of show music, front of house. But of course, the doorbell is currently coming from front of house. Well, we don't want that from front of house, so we're just going to change that to be upstage. And the dog barking, we're going to change to be upstage. And again, we might want to pan it off to one side, upstage as well. So we have upstage. I didn't actually change that. Upstage. And door knock, upstage. So now we have in some proper routing for the show. If you are working on a laptop at home, or you need to set everything up, then just make sure all of these buses are sent to the same place. When it comes to actually show time, so for instance here, I would then select outputs 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6 on this particular sound card, and then I would route those appropriately into the mixer, into the sound system.